I didn't want to be a movie star, first of all. I just felt people in LA and the movie business were all messed up. I didn't want to be like that. She's known for being bubbly and happy with a cute laugh. But even Goldie Hawn has a breaking point. At 79, the Hollywood star is finally telling us about the 6 actors who made her life on movie sets really bad. With many years of experience in show business, Hawn isn't keeping quiet anymore. From diva behavior to personal betrayal, these names shocked even her biggest fans. Kirk Douglas, the last name on Goldie Hawn's quiet blacklist, wasn't a crazy rebel like Bill Murray or a cold meanie like Sean Penn. It was a man loved by many people, held up as the perfect example of old Hollywood men, a legend, a pioneer, a man who called himself a gentleman, Kirk Douglas. And yet for Goldie, being around him made her feel something far less nice. She had always respected old stars. Goldie never pretended that her success came without getting help from the stars before her. She knew how to enter a room built by others and say thank you. But there's a big difference between respect and really liking someone. And as she got older, she realized that some of those old stars never saw her as an equal builder, only as decoration on the building work. Kirk Douglas was one of them. In public, she never said bad things about him. That wasn't her style. She valued being graceful, diplomatic, and staying above the drama. But privately, among close friends and people she trusted, a different picture came out, one of slow, choking condescension. At countless industry events over the years, Douglas would come up to her with what many saw as harmless flirting, over-the-top greetings, slow hand kisses, and dramatic winks that seemed taken from another time. Others laughed at his old school charm. Goldie smiled politely, but inside it bothered her. "He talks to me like I'm still the blonde in a bikini scene," she once told a close friend. "And I've won an Oscar. It wasn't one big fight, no headline-grabbing moment that showed a break. It was worse. It was death by 1,000 cuts, panels where she couldn't finish a thought without being interrupted, round tables where her ideas about the film business were skipped over or totally ignored, scripts she helped guide were introduced with flowery praise for the visionary men, while she was described as the always bubbly Goldie Hawn. 'You can be #1 on the call sheet,' she said once, after an awards event where Douglas had once again overshadowed her with patronizing affection, and still feel like the decoration. To some, Douglas's behavior might have seemed generational, but to Goldie it was a sign of something deeper, a legacy of dismissing women's smarts, authority, and creative voice in favor of surface-level charm and old-fashioned gallantry. It wasn't that she was scared of him or even hated him. What hurt more was the quiet message: "You're not part of the club, dear. You're the doll in the window." Goldie put up with it for years with her usual dignity, but there came a point when she began drawing boundaries without apologizing. One moment stood out. During a development meeting for a film she was co-producing, Douglas unexpectedly showed up as a favor to someone in the room. When Goldie began presenting her thoughts on the script's emotional core, Douglas cut in mid-sentence with a joke about her always knowing how to sell emotion. The room laughed. Goldie didn't. She closed her notebook. "I've said what I need to say," she said calmly before walking out. "No fireworks, just finality." She continued to speak warmly about Michael Douglas, praising his modern take on partnership and his willingness to listen. "Michael hears you," she once said. "He's not just waiting to speak." But she refused to remember Kirk's memory with anything more than passing politeness. When asked in a 2010s interview about her thoughts on the legends she had worked alongside, she skipped his name entirely. Not by accident. "Some men don't deserve a second act in your memory," she later told a friend. "They got their spotlight. I don't need to hold the flashlight for them anymore." To Goldie, Kirk Douglas was never a villain, just a mirror, one that showed how deeply Hollywood's roots had wrapped themselves around the idea that a woman's smile was her greatest thing. No matter how smart her mind or how heavy her resume, she didn't hate him. She didn't try to cancel him, but she refused to let his behavior become part of her story without looking at it closely. For every hand kiss he offered, she gave a polite nod. For every dismissive chuckle, she gave herself distance. And for every moment that tried to freeze her in time as a girl in a bikini, as a ditzy blonde, as a prop, she took back her story. Goldie Hawn didn't just survive that version of Hollywood. She outlived it. Warren Beatty. If Chevy Chase earned a spot on Goldie Hawn's personal blacklist through chaos and cruelty, the man who followed him there did it with something far more planned. Charm turned into a weapon. In the 1970s, Warren Beatty was Hollywood royalty. A man whose name alone made people think of power, magnetism, and controversy. He wasn't just a star. He was a myth in motion. Famous not only for films like Bonnie and Clyde and Shampoo, but for the trail of broken hearts and whispered scandals he left behind. Beatty didn't just date women. He collected them, chased them like prizes in a private game of seduction. At the height of her fame, Goldie Hawn became one of his most wanted targets. At first, Goldie was flattered. Who wouldn't be? Beatty wasn't just an actor. He had influence. In an industry where a single endorsement could unlock careers, being on Beatty's radar meant opportunity. He invited her to lunch, then to dinner. Conversation was flattering, the smiles charming, the body language rehearsed. He charmed like he breathed effortlessly. At parties, he stayed near her with drinks, compliments, and casual touches that lasted just a second too long. Goldie, always sharp behind her bubbly exterior, saw it all for what it was. She was no innocent, no starlet waiting to be swept away. She knew Beatty's history, the rumors, the conquests, the famous women who had all fallen under his spell, only to find themselves reduced to stories in his larger-than-life story. She didn't want to be a chapter in his book, so she turned him down politely, consistently, and without drama. She smiled, declined his invitations, and moved on with grace. Beatty wasn't used to hearing no, especially from someone he didn't consider his equal. Warren's charm began to crack. His once playful tone grew cool. Goldie noticed the shift, and so did others. The parties stopped, the invitations faded, but something more subtle began happening. Whispers started to go around. Quiet, sneaky rumors. Goldie was difficult, flaky, not serious enough for dramatic roles. She was too cute, too not right for awards movies. Directors started to hesitate. Scripts disappeared. The types of meetings she had once walked into with ease were suddenly rescheduled or canceled altogether. It wasn't a career-killing blow. It was a slow leak, the kind that drained opportunity, without leaving fingerprints. Industry insiders would later describe it as Hollywood sabotage 101. Not public humiliation, but quiet suggestion repeated just enough to plant doubt in the right rooms. One producer recalled being told directly, "Goldie's got baggage." But the only baggage, as it turned out, was Warren Beatty's bruised ego. Goldie never spoke publicly about the full extent of what happened. When asked in interviews if she would ever work with Beatty, she offered a polite but pointed response. "I don't mix business with power plays." It was all she ever needed to say. In private, however, she was more direct. According to friends, she described Beatty as a man who doesn't handle rejection. He punishes it. And that punishment came not with tantrums or shouting, but with surgical precision, through connections, offhand comments, and subtle blackballing in a town where perception is power. Unlike others who might have fought back or fed the gossip, Goldie refused to give him that satisfaction. She stayed silent, professional, and focused on her work. But among those close to her, Beatty's name became radioactive, said only in groans, rolled eyes, or the occasional clipped remark. That's not happening. There was no anger, just certainty. Goldie had made her decision, and she wasn't going back. Years passed. Goldie's career flourished on her own terms. She didn't need Warren Beatty, and she never sought his approval. But Hollywood is a small world, and fate is cruelly ironic. At a glittering awards show years later, the two crossed paths again. Beatty, ever the showman, approached her with that famous smile, as if nothing had ever happened. Goldie met him with one of her own, cool, effortless, and icy as a winter wind. Then, without a word, she turned and walked away. A journalist nearby caught the exchange and whispered, "That smile could freeze hell." That moment, brief, silent, and perfect, was Goldie Hawn's final word. She hadn't raised her voice or written a mean article. She had simply outlasted him. While Beatty's legacy became a tangled mess of gossip, ego, and damaged relationships, Goldie's remained unshaken, defined by toughness, grace, and a quiet refusal to play anyone's game but her own. Chevy Chase. When Foul Play came out in 1978, it seemed like a comedy dream come true. Audiences fell in love with the unlikely pairing of the charming Goldie Hawn and the quick-witted Chevy Chase. Their on-screen chemistry crackled with energy, a blend of innocent charm and sly humor that had moviegoers begging for more. But while the laughs poured from the screen, things behind the scenes were anything but lighthearted. According to multiple insiders, what happened during filming was a storm of ego, tension, and emotional trouble centered almost entirely around Chevy Chase. At the time, Chase was fresh off his huge rise on Saturday Night Live, where his smug personality had already begun to eclipse his comedic talent. On the set of Foul Play, that inflated ego exploded in full force. Crew members described him as explosive, one moment charming and playful, the next moody and condescending. Director Colin Higgins, a gentle but firm creative voice, quickly found himself outmaneuvered by Chevy's refusal to stick to the script. The actor often made up lines without warning, threw out entire scenes if they didn't amuse him, and ruined the pacing by rejecting takes he didn't personally enjoy. Higgins tried to maintain control, but Chevy's antics often turned a day's shoot into a battlefield of wills. He was a walking contradiction. One crew member recalled, "He acted like he didn't care about the movie, but then would throw a tantrum if a joke didn't land exactly how he wanted." Even worse, Chevy's behavior wasn't limited to creative disagreements. His interactions with the crew were routinely laced with contempt. He yelled at lighting techs for ruining his rhythm, scoffed at makeup artists for fussing with Goldie. Wow. He waited and treated production assistants like personal servants. According to one witness, he once threw a prop across the set when a boom mic dipped too close to his face. The strain on Goldie Hawn was huge. Known for her professionalism and grace under pressure, she tried her best to rise above the chaos. She kept the crew's spirits up with jokes, helped smooth tensions on difficult days, and constantly made efforts to calm Chevy's arrogance with kindness. But even she had limits. A stylist overheard her whisper, "He's not funny when the cameras stop rolling. He's just cruel," and the comment sent quiet waves through the production team. Hawn, beloved by nearly everyone on set, was beginning to break. The dynamic between the two stars became increasingly toxic as the shoot dragged on. Chevy frequently interrupted Goldie during takes, sneered at her lines, and even refused to shoot scenes unless they were rewritten to give him what he called real punchlines. He wasn't improvising to elevate the film. He was sabotaging it to keep the spotlight firmly on himself. By the final weeks of filming, their relationship had deteriorated to near silence. Unless absolutely necessary, the two didn't speak. Chevy, oozing sarcasm and ego, reportedly made mean remarks about Goldie's image and talent, questioning her comedic skill despite her status as one of the most bankable stars of the 1970s. "She's lucky to be in my orbit," he allegedly told. Producer. The disdain wasn't hidden. It was in his posture, his smirks, and his constant undermining jokes delivered with a grin and a knife. Goldie, true to form, never lashed out publicly, but those close to her say she was deeply hurt. She began requesting to rehearse scenes alone and avoided spending unnecessary time on set. One assistant remembered her saying, "It's not about me being thin-skinned. It's about not being humiliated for showing up and doing my job." For someone known for her optimism and joy, the experience was emotionally exhausting. The crew found themselves split. Some quietly sided with Goldie, others tried to stay neutral, and a few, disappointed by Chevy's behavior, simply counted down the days to the wrap party. The set became a minefield. A makeup artist said, "People stopped joking, stopped hanging around. Everyone just wanted to get through the day." Chevy, on the other hand, seemed either clueless or amused by the drama he was creating. His reputation as a difficult colleague had preceded him, but foul play solidified it. One grip, who once admired him, said bitterly, "He wasn't a genius. He was a bully with timing." A lighting technician added, "He acted like it was his kingdom, and we were all court jesters put here to serve his ego." Despite all the turmoil, Foul Play became a hit. Critics praised the film, fans loved the banter, and it marked a turning point in Goldie Hawn's already rising career. But when studios came calling about a possible sequel or reunion film, Goldie didn't hesitate. She gave her agent one simple response: not interested. No matter how much money or prestige was offered, she refused to work with Chevy again. Bill Murray. By the time the late 1980s rolled around, Goldie Hawn was more than just Hollywood's golden girl. She was a brand. With her signature giggle, feathered blonde hair, and wide-eyed charisma, she'd conquered everything from slapstick comedies to emotionally rich dramas. She was trusted by studios and beloved by audiences. So, when a quirky high-concept comedy landed on her desk, with Bill Murray attached as a potential co-star, it seemed like a no-brainer. The studio buzzed with excitement. On paper, it was a dream team. Goldie, America's sweetheart, and Murray, comedy's unpredictable genius. But what looked like lightning in a bottle quickly turned into a storm she never wanted to weather again. It started at the very first table read, a gathering of actors, writers, and producers meant to set the tone. Goldie arrived on time, as always, ready to dive into the material. But Murray, he strolled in over an hour late. No greeting, no apology, no explanation. He didn't even bother with pleasantries. Just crashed into the room, made a mean crack at one of the junior writers, and tossed himself into a chair using the script pages as if they were napkins. The room fell into an uneasy silence. Goldie, ever the professional, tried to hold her composure, but inside her instincts were already flaring. When the reading began, things went from awkward to unbearable. Instead of playing the scenes as written, Murray immediately began hijacking the material. He tossed out punchlines that weren't in the script, rewrote key monologues, and mocked the dialogue like it was beneath him, where the film had been designed. To balance comedy with emotional depth, Murray flattened every beat into a cheap gag. He rolled his eyes, pulled faces, even mimed boredom during Goldie's lines. The writers, some of whom had spent a year crafting the script, sat frozen in disbelief as Murray improvised entire pages on the fly, treating their work like a sandbox. For his ego, Goldie tried to keep up, plastering on a polite smile, giving him space to riff. But it felt more like fending off chaos than collaborating. She was no stranger to improvisation. Her early days on Laughing were built on spontaneity. But this wasn't playful or inspired. It felt like sabotage. Then came the moment that ended it all. Midway through a particularly emotional scene, Goldie was delivering a line with quiet sincerity, trying despite everything to ground the moment. Without warning, Murray turned to her, his face twisted into that familiar deadpan smirk, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Why don't you try acting like you've done drama before?" The room burst into uncomfortable laughter. Some laughed because they were nervous, others because they didn't know what else to do. But Goldie, she didn't even flinch. She calmly closed her script, stood up, and walked out of the room. No big speech, no blow-up, just quiet dignity. During the break, she left the studio and never came back. The next day, her representatives called the producers. No negotiations, no apologies, just a clear message. Goldie was out. The press never caught wind. There were no rumors of a feud, no juicy leaks, just one powerful woman making a decision to protect her peace. Behind the scenes, rumors swirled. One insider recalled, "He thinks unpredictability is genius. I think it's exhausting." Another added, "Stay away from comedians who confuse disrespect with spontaneity." What Murray had done wasn't just rude dot. It was part of a broader pattern Goldie had seen too many times before. Brilliant men weaponizing their charm, bulldozing through scripts, scenes, and co-stars, all while the women around them were expected to smooth over the damage with a smile. This wasn't about one bad joke. It was about the emotional toll of being the steady hand in a hurricane of male ego. There was no reconciliation, no heartwarming reunion interview years later. Studio heads tried to patch things up. After all, Goldie was still bankable, and Murray still a draw. But she refused to budge. She didn't throw shade. She didn't complain. She simply never worked with him again. As one close friend would later say, she didn't just shut the door. She removed the whole damn house from her map. That single experience marked a turning point in Goldie's career. She began saying no. And not in a quiet Hollywood way. She passed on scripts that paired her with difficult men. She backed out of projects where she'd be expected to play the straight woman to a chaos agent in a buddy comedy. The late 80s and early 90s saw a noticeable shift in the types of roles she accepted. And when asked why she no longer did as many male-driven comedies, she'd flash that serene, knowing smile and offer the simplest explanation. "I chose peace." Sean Penn. If Bill Murray had left Goldie Hawn disillusioned with comedy, then Sean Penn left her questioning the very idea of public solidarity among artists. His brand of icy dismissal wasn't the explosive chaos of Murray. It was something subtler, sharper, and far more deliberate, a chill wrapped in calculated contempt. It happened on a night it was supposed to be about healing. The venue, a star-studded charity gala in Malibu, aimed at raising awareness for mental health, a cause deeply personal to Goldie. She had spent decades advocating for emotional well-being, especially in children, and was invited to speak from the heart. Her table was near the front, filled with fellow advocates, psychologists, and celebrities who genuinely cared. But a few, tables over, seated like a bored king surveying a cork he barely tolerated, sat Sean Penn. From the moment Goldie rose to approach the podium, the mood shifted, but not in the way one might expect. As she walked across the room, her speech clutched in one hand, some guests noticed Penn beginning to fidget, not the nervous kind of shifting, but performative impatience. He rolled his eyes dramatically, sighed loud enough for surrounding tables to hear, then leaned back with the exaggerated posture of a man watching paint dry. It wasn't subtle, and it wasn't missed. One guest described him slumping in his chair, like a sulky teenager forced to sit through church. Another overheard him mutter under his breath, just loud enough to poison the air. Another celebrity wellness sermon. A few people laughed awkwardly. Most didn't know where to look. But the damage was already done before Goldie even opened her mouth. Still, she delivered. Her voice steady, her message sincere. She spoke not just of her own battles, but of the importance of kindness in a world that constantly demanded performance. She didn't ask for applause. She asked for understanding. And when she finished, there was polite clapping, followed by a single voice rising above the noise, unmistakably loud. She should stick to giggling. It was Penn. He leaned back in his chair like a man who thought he'd just delivered the line of the night. A few gasped. Others pretended not to hear. Goldie paused for only a second, caught the comment mid-step as she returned to her table, then did something so characteristic of her that it almost hurt. She smiled, raised her champagne glass gracefully, and exited the event not long after. But in the car ride home, something in her broke, not in defeat, but in disillusionment. According to close friends, Goldie didn't cry because she was embarrassed. She cried because she was tired. "My whole career," she reportedly said that night. "And I'm still reduced to giggles by men who don't know what the hell I stand for." This wasn't the first time a male actor had tried to diminish her, but something about Penn's coldness cut deeper. With Murray, at least there was unpredictability. With Penn, there was intent. He had sized her up, labeled her as lightweight, and done so in front of an audience that had come to listen, to learn. It wasn't just disrespectful, it was cruel. That night, Goldie made a quiet decision. She was done. No more interviews if his name was attached, no joint panels, no staged photo ops at future galas. When later asked about him in a magazine interview, she kept it short. "Not my energy." A few months later, in a more private setting, she allowed herself to be a little sharper. You can believe in activism without stomping on someone else's purpose. To Goldie, the encounter wasn't a feud. It was a fracture, a revelation. Penn, with his brooding scowl and decades of serious actor acclaim, had built his image on wounded intensity. For years, directors lauded him as uncompromising and passionate. Goldie saw something else. She saw a man who wielded cynicism like a sword, cutting down those whose optimism made him uncomfortable. And in that single moment, he dismissed not just a woman, but an entire worldview. She never retaliated. She never publicly called him out or mounted a PR defense. She didn't have to. She just removed herself quietly, gracefully, but completely. That's how Goldie fought back, by not giving the moment more space than it already took. But that doesn't mean she forgot. To this day, she keeps her distance from Sean Penn emotionally and professionally. There is no open hostility, but there is a silence pointed, permanent, and unshakable. Because for Goldie Hawn, the real betrayal wasn't just the mean remark. It was the reminder that even after decades of success, advocacy, and resilience, there would still be rooms where men like Sean Penn would refuse to see her. Dustin Hoffman. The next man in Goldie Hawn's path didn't come to charm her. He came to break her. At a moment that would shape the rest of her career. She found herself in a cold, clinical casting room, auditioning for a highbrow prestige drama. This wasn't just another role. It was a carefully considered pivot. Known for her breezy, lovable comedic roles, Goldie had been seeking something more serious, something layered. She was ready to show the industry she had depth, that she wasn't just a punchline in heels and mascara. Dustin Hoffman was already attached to the project. That carried weight. The role promised gravitas, prestige, and a certain kind of credibility that only a project with Hoffman's name could guarantee. On paper, it was electric. Two Oscar-winning icons from opposite sides of the tonal spectrum coming together for a dramatic masterclass. For Goldie, it could have been a defining moment until it wasn't. From the moment the scene began, Hoffman's energy was off. Goldie, despite nerves, gave it her all. But barely a few lines in, Hoffman halted everything abruptly, flatly, and with a disarming lack of grace, he said, "You're not connecting." The room went silent, scripts stiffened in laps, eyebrows raised. Before she could respond, Hoffman turned to the producers with a smirk and twisted the knife. "She's still playing it like a sitcom." It was a calculated move, not an observation, not direction. It was a jab dressed in intellect. The producers laughed, but it wasn't the laughter of joy or support. It was nervous, fractured, and in some cases complicit. Goldie stood frozen, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she instantly recognized the deeper game. This wasn't a critique. It was humiliation doled out publicly and with surgical precision. What should have been a collaboration quickly turned into an autopsy, and Goldie was the body on the table. She didn't cry, didn't storm out, didn't flinch. She locked in. She finished the scene. Her voice didn't crack. Her hands didn't shake. But inside, something broke. Not her confidence, not her talent, but her willingness to subject herself to that kind of violation masked as craft. She left the room not with tears, but with certainty. The next morning, she dropped out. No follow-up, no negotiation. She called her agent and delivered a line that would later become legendary among her inner circle. "I won't fight to be taken seriously by men who already decided I'm a punchline." The role was recast. Hoffman moved on. The industry barely blinked, but behind closed doors, everyone who had been in that casting room that day remembered. Hoffman didn't reveal a weak performance. He revealed a toxic truth. It wasn't method acting. It was method abuse. He wasn't sharpening a scene. He was exercising dominance. This wasn't artistic rigor. It was ego on a leash. And Goldie refused to let it bite. She didn't just decline the role. She cut off any further talks of reconciliation. She made it crystal clear she would never work with Dustin Hoffman again. And true to her word, she didn't. Years later, in a rare moment of reflection, Goldie told an interviewer, "In this business, some men forget they're not directing the women around them." It was as close to naming names as she ever got. But to those familiar with the story, there was no mystery about who she meant. Privately, she admitted the moment stayed with her, not because she lost the role, but because for a fleeting second she questioned her instincts. And for someone like Goldie, whose entire career had been built on trusting her gut and defying expectations, that was the true betrayal. A close friend remembered that night well. Goldie went home, sat in silence, and then wrote in her journal, "He tried to shrink me. I won't let him." She turned away from that corner of the industry, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. She refused to be molded by others' ideas of legitimacy. She stopped chasing dramatic approval and instead carved her own definition of power. She remained in comedy, not because she couldn't do drama, but because she knew her strength didn't need to be dressed in tragedy to be respected. When asked years later if she'd ever return to dramatic roles, she'd smile that unmistakable Goldie smile, tilt her head, and say, "If the room's right." It was subtle, it was sharp, and it said everything. What do you think about the actors that Goldie Hawn hates the most? Leave us your comments in the section below. We hope you have found this helpful video. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you liked it. Thank you for watching this, and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.